We are back for another episode of the Becoming Project. I am Pastor Michael. It is good to be with you all yet again. I hope you've enjoyed so far what we have offered, and it's only going to get better. And so I'm excited for all the things to come. And I'm super excited today because I have my friend, my brother. He's definitely become a brother, definitely become a good friend. And so I have my friend, the Reverend Dr. Khalif Smith, director of Connectional Ministries with the Desert Southwest Conference. What's up, brother? We
What's
thank you.
up?
How
What's
are you,
up?
man?
Yeah, man, I'm glad to be here. It's
Good.
really cool. I appreciate the invitation. Just excited about having a conversation
No
and
doubt.
explaining or exploring how we might continue to be in ministry together.
Love it.
And definitely one of my brothers.
Awesome. Awesome. So if you don't know, the Becoming Project is a space where we get to hear the stories of those that are in our lives, those that we may not know that are just doing some amazing things in their lives and how they've become who God has called them to become. And so in this space, we get to hear these stories of what it meant for these, our guests, to become who God has called them to become. And so with that, my friend, the Reverend Doctor, grew up in the
The
Bronx.
Bronx, yes,
Woo! Man,
yes.
come on, tell us about that. I've never been to the Bronx. I've only been to New York once,
What?
and I've never been to the Bronx.
Oh, come
So,
on. I need to take you.
yes, because I need to see the ins and outs.
Absolutely. So, New York is a very special place, right? I mean, the one great part about growing up in the Bronx was that I was exposed to many, many things at a very early age.
Okay.
So you can take that for a good thing or maybe not so good. But I really enjoyed the experience. It gave me the opportunity to see the world and the multifaceted ways
Yeah.
that people live and grow. One thing about New York was that it's multicultural. Just
Yeah.
I don't like using the term melting pot
Okay.
because I don't believe that we are all melted into some one thing. But the beauty is that there's a diversity there, right? And so growing up in New York was the idea of it was that you could go from one block to the next block and get authentic Italian food, authentic Hispanic food, and many different types of Hispanic, right? Dominican or Puerto Rican.
Okay.
You could go another block and get some Jamaican patties. You know
Wow.
what I mean? So I
Wow.
lived in off of University Avenue in the Bronx,
Okay.
which and the place where I lived on one end of the corner was a very deeply Jamaican type of community, and then on the other end was Puerto Rican.
Okay.
So, like, depending on which way I went down the block, would be whatever neighborhood I would be in. So,
Awesome.
yeah. So
Awesome.
New York is really cool, and the Bronx specifically. Yeah.
Come on, Bronx.
Yeah. Right.
Shout out to the Bronx.
No doubt.
So, how did your early life, those experiences, kind of shape your understanding of faith,
Yeah.
of community, identity?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So my stepfather was a United Methodist pastor
Okay.
in the Bronx, right?
Wow.
And so when my mom married my stepdad, we were initially living in Queens, and so as they got married, then the family moved to New Jersey to Drew University, where he went to seminary. We lived at Drew, and then we were reassigned back to the Bronx.
Okay.
And so the journey of faith in that context of being a PK, if you will, a child of a pastor, was really kind of cool in that I got to see the functioning of the church as a quote unquote business from behind the scenes, which ultimately led to me leaving the church because I saw all of the hypocrisy in people. But at the same time, it was very formational in that I was very active in youth group and active in social justice ministries through the church, feeding the hungry, visiting the homeless shelters, visiting uh, differently abled people in those types of facilities, and and really being about the work of ministry. There was a crack house on one end of the block where the church mobilized to work with the local police to get that crack house shut down,
Okay.
and to work through some of the gangs and drug activity that was happening in the neighborhood. And of course, this is in the 80s, right?
Okay.
And so all of those things were very formational for my faith, and having that connection to God as we attended to worship, fellowship in the church, and learning, the narrative of Scripture. So those things did really kind of help in shaping my spiritual formation.
Got you. So when did you leave the Bronx?
Yeah, so I left the Bronx. I left the Bronx when I was 17 or 18. Yeah, 17, 18. 18. Um, my family had gotten to a point of some toxicity.
Okay.
The work in ministry is not easy work, and so my stepfather was going through some things, and as a teenager,
Yep.
living in New York, I was a little wild too, and so, and again, beginning to see kind of the hypocrisy that was happening in the church, and church people saying, we're holy and we're righteous and we do this and we do that, and I see that on Sunday, and then Monday morning I see them out dealing crack,
Sure.
or on the corner doing some frivolous things. And so for me, that was the time in my life where I began to question my faith. I began to doubt some of the things that I was seeing.
Sure.
With not just faith, but just life in general.
Yeah.
And so I had graduated high school. I was attending college at Bronx Community College, and was taking courses at some other colleges as well, Manhattan College and Lehman College. And it was a time of kind of tension in New York, where Governor Cuomo was making some decisions about education and funding for communities of color. And so that was a little bit of a rebel in that time period. But the questioning then got to a head where the toxicity in my family, as well as that questioning period, I decided that maybe being in New York wasn't the best option for me. And so I called a cousin who was in Georgia and asked, "Hey, can I come stay with you for a little bit, or just I want to get my life together." So,
Gotcha. Come on, cousin.
right.
Come on. It's always a family ram in the bush, as we would say.
Amen.
So you talked about losing your faith, or in that process of losing our faith. And for some of you listeners, and I know personally, there's been definitely times of faith definitely being tested and wavered, but also in ways of, do I still want to do this? Do I still want to be a follower of Christ, if you will? Do I even believe in all of this stuff?
Sure.
How did you stay connected to the faith, to say, I'm going to stick this thing out?
Yeah. I didn't.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
real talk. I didn't. When I left New York, it was really a venturing out, and maybe a time of discovery.
Okay.
Learning about other faith traditions, learning why do people believe in God? Why do people follow in a faith tradition? What does that look like in other communities of faith? And so that was an exploratory time, really,
Okay.
and not denying my connection to faith, but exploring other connections to faith.
Gotcha.
And so learning about Islam, learning about Buddhism, learning about different faith traditions, and really trying to understand if God is present in the world, if there is a God, then how do people relate to that God, and how do they come to be people of faith? because, kind of growing up in it,
Yep.
you're fully immersed, right?
Yeah.
There's, and not to say that I couldn't question when I was a younger person, but I didn't even know the questions to ask. So, that period of time, kind of leaving New York, leaving my home that I grew up in, and kind of venturing into Georgia was a time of exploration and kind of finding out my way.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to
Yeah.
find my way.
Awesome. Awesome. So when we get to Georgia, we're doing this exploration. When did or when does this feeling of call to ministry, or since I'm now, figuring this thing out,
Yeah.
I'm researching, I'm looking. No, I have not lost my connection with the divine, but I'm still searching. What was that like to get that moment of clarity to say, oh, I've been called to pastor, because I know my journey, right?
Right.
So I used to ask my friends, my pastor friends, especially before I accepted my call. Now I knew I was going to accept it, but hey, what was your call like? Like that was
Right.
always my question. What was your call story? And so realizing no one's call story is ever going to be the same, but I wanted to know because I wanted to make sure I
Right.
was on the right track.
Right.
So what was it like? What was that? Was it a light? It just flicked. It just came over you. It was, yeah. What was that like?
Yeah. So, to be completely honest and fair, I knew I was called back when I was serving with
Yeah.
my dad, right? And people would tell me that, you know what, you're called to ministry. When they would see me interact with, people on the street, or when they would see me interact in certain situations as we were youth and young, they would say, you're called to ministry. And my leaving the church, my leaving home was kind of a pushback on that. No, that's not who I am. I've seen this struggle of my stepdad. I've seen the woes of being a pastor.
Yep.
I don't want that.
Yep.
And so, after moving to Georgia and kind of exploring and doing work in the private sector, like I started working as a contractor, built my own business, and then ultimately saying, you know what, I think I'd like to have a career in something. That something that really came easy to me was the tech industry,
Okay.
and so that's why I kind of went into computer science and what have you. And so I was building my life based upon kind of the values of the world. Do I have a good solid job? Do I have an education? Can I afford a home
Right.
and vehicles and all of that kind of stuff? And so I did that, right? It was building, building, building. I finally met my wife while I was in undergrad, and we started a family. Right? We
Okay.
started to, and it's a blended family, mixed family. It was me and my children and her child, and we came together and we had a child together, and then we began to think about where do we go to church.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
at this point, I was kind of more open to that, right?
Okay.
Like, had done my exploration, had done all of those things. Actually, let me step back one notch. Before I met my wife, I actually had an experience where I went to a church. A friend of mine had taken me to a church, and it was around Easter time, and so we went to this. I think it was a Methodist church, but it was a passion play.
Okay.
Yeah, so we go to this passion play, and the Aldersgate experience. For those who are Wesleyan, understand this. But I was sitting there watching this play, and this was after kind of doing all of this exploration and finding out about other faith traditions, and so I have this invitation from a friend to go to church or to this passion play, and I'm sitting there watching this passion play, and I'm sitting in the first couple of rows, and it's theatrics, right? They're coming down the aisle. Jesus is carrying the cross, and they get up to the stage, and they got the lighting and everything, and they get him kind of propped it up, and he's stretched out, and wow, what an overwhelming presence of God's spirit in that moment, as I visually watched this and accepted, I think, that Christ did this for me. Now, again, I was raised in the faith and knew these stories, had seen passion plays before, but in that moment, this was like a personal, maybe bump on the head,
Sure.
knock me over kind of thing. I just came to tears, and that this was done for me, even in my brokenness, and even in my running,
Yep.
even. Now, I did not accept my call on that moment,
Sure.
right? But I was still like, nope.
Right.
But I do remember that being very formative moment, right? That day was transforming. I would say that in that moment, I accepted Christ in a new way for me, right? Like, wow, this is real,
Yep.
right? Now, all of the research that I have done on other faith traditions, this is why I believe the things that I believe,
Okay.
and that Christ died for me. Not We have this amazing faith tradition where our God comes to be with us. That's the In Christianity, it's the only faith tradition, right, that
Yes.
God comes to be among the people and to actually walk the same walk that we do and to experience the world the same way that we do, even though God doesn't need to do that,
Right.
and reveal to us God's self through
Wow.
this gift of Christ, right? And
Yes.
so I think I got a realization of that in that moment. So maybe 3 or 4 years later, right, now I meet my wife, and now I'm open to going to
Okay.
church, right? And I had maybe visited churches here and there in that 3 year period or 4 year period or whatever, but still not. There wasn't a motivation for me to answer my call or anything like that. So as my wife and I began to build our household, and I began to we as a couple began to visit churches. We went to a Catholic church. My wife is raised Catholic, and so for me, an openness to all faith traditions, and certainly Catholicism. But we visited a Catholic church a couple of times, and just didn't click. Right? Yeah, it was good. We heard a good sermon every now and then. Just didn't move us.
Gotcha.
And so I asked for us to go and visit a Methodist church in the neighborhood near where we lived, and so we did, and we connected kind of right away. She really enjoyed the worship. It was more contemporary style, more open. The pastor, who has become one of my mentors in ministry, was very very well spoken, awesome sermons. And so then is when we really began to kind of connect to a faith community again.
Awesome.
And when that occurred, then my pastor put me to work right away. Oh, you're a PK? That's great. Let's get you teaching a Bible study, or
Of
let's get
course.
you working with the youth, or let's
Of
get you
course.
doing this and that. And so slowly but surely, I ended up kind of stepping back into the kind of work, if you will, of the church, while still having that apprehension around knowing that I was called, right? So, and maybe fear,
Sure.
even.
Sure.
But then there comes a day. There comes a day where I've kind of gotten to the pinnacle in my IT career. Had done 3 degrees in IT, and was looking for that next thing.
Okay.
How can I become more successful? How can I climb the ladder even more? we're living in a fairly affluent neighborhood.
Okay.
We're doing well, have a home, and all of the things, the family, and
We live in the American dream.
living the American dream, but not satisfied.
Mm.
Right? Like the heart is just not. I'm getting frustrated because I put my resume out to a new company,
Okay.
and one company would be like, "Oh, you got way too much stuff here." I'd sit down with it for an interview, and the person would be like, "You're going to take my job. You got
Wow.
enough stuff on here to take my job right now." No, and then I would take things off my resume,
Mm.
and I'd put it back in and get an interview, and they'd be like, "Well, you talk like you know more than you know, right?" And or you're not qualified enough, and so there was just kind of frustration, kind of going back and forth in doing that. Experience a little systemic racism. I mean, in the IT world, let's be clear,
Yeah.
with a name like Khalif, putting those resumes out. At the same time, again, some will look at it, some wouldn't.
Sure.
Sometimes I would get the resume or get the interview not. So, anyways, it was that frustration was happening, and I really began to pray around God. What is it that you would have for me, right? I'm doing all of these things.
Yeah.
I'm trying to support my family. I'm trying to grow. Thanks be to God, I'm going back to church.
Sure.
Reconnecting with my faith, and really and truly, God gave me some signs about answering my call. You want to hear about that?
We're gonna get to that.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Come on, talk about doors closing. I don't for a lot of people they may not understand that part of it, especially being called to ministry is tough, man. And I too ran for a long time, just because I personally didn't feel like ain't no way the Lord finna use
Right.
this
Me.
person.
Right.
Ain't no way. Like, no. And so it's interesting to hear you say, like, I'm doing these applications, I'm doing these interviews, and it reminds me of my best friend who was going through that same type of thing. It reminds me of Daz, right? My partner, like going through that same type of thing, interviews and doing these things, but still getting shut out. And I am qualified.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I'm supposed to be here. And so it's just funny how the Lord gets what the Lord wants, especially out of us. And so this is definitely that where, no, you are not going into these spaces. I am so sorry. I have something else for you, but this is
This
not
is not it.
it.
Yeah.
So the call happens. It just falls into your lap.
More like knocks me over the head.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So that prayer, right? And in that season of looking for new IT jobs, trying to climb higher in the corporate ladder, doors being closed, having just finished a master's degree in network security, and now having at least the paper and education to really move into higher spaces in that field, and being so deeply unhappy, right? Not unhappy with my family
Sure.
and that, but unhappy with where I was, I think, in the world or my career. We go to church one Sunday, and it's a contemporary service. They got the screens up and everything. And the messaging on that Sunday happened to be, "Are you being called?" And and even today it moves me.
Sure.
But looking up at that screen and going, "Really? This is what you got for me?"
Right.
And I remember my wife putting her hand on my knee, and us being in that service, and I don't even know that she understood the depth of which this movement was happening in me.
Sure.
She knew that I was looking for other jobs and doing that, but she said, "I think this service might be for you." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Wow. You see
Wow.
that? You see that in me?
Wow.
And so the message was great. They talked about their call and their walk of faith, and but it really did stir in me, having made that prayer of, Lord, where are you leading me, to now seeing this messaging. And I said, Lord, I know that you want me to work in ministry, but I'm not prepared for that. I don't have the
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the education. I don't
Yep.
have the pedigree, background. I'm certainly not. I'm still a sinner,
Yeah.
right? And I don't have the capacity to do that.
Wow.
And as we were driving home, I get a phone call from a cousin. Hadn't spoken to her. She's a pastor in New York. Hadn't spoken to her in probably 3 or 4 years prior. She gives me a call. She says, "Hey, cuz, just giving you a ring. This is not a social call. Although we can catch up later." She says, "I'm just being obedient to my call," and she says, "I just want you to know it's time for you to answer your call." And I was like, "Wait, what?" I said, "Do you even have any clue what you're doing right now? Like what I just been through?" Nope. A couple days later, I wake up with scripture on my mind. I'm like, oh, this is crazy. I've never woken up with scripture on my mind. I don't think about scripture like that. Matthew 10. Okay. I kind of call out to my wife in the background. It was early morning. She's in the other room, and I'm like, honey, I'm dreaming about scripture. She says, well, did you read it? And I'm like, no, of course not. I don't want to do
Right, 'cause
that.
I don't want to.
I don't want to do that. And for whatever reason, I had a bookshelf right next to my bed at that time. Oh, because I was doing studies, right?
You're right.
And I had a Bible and pulled it off the shelf. And she says, well, read the whole chapter. And I was like, oh, gosh, okay. So I look at Matthew 10, and Matthew 10 is a scripture where Jesus names the disciples, calls them by name. He gives them power and authority to cast out demons and to heal the sick. And then he casts them out into the world to do ministry. And all of the doubts that I had about answering and fulfilling my call are answered in that scripture, the whole chapter, right? Don't take anything for your troubles. Everything will be provided for you. One of my big worries in ministry was, or even answering the call, was that I don't want to lead someone in the wrong direction. I don't want to say the wrong things.
Yes.
I'm responsible for people's souls, right? I don't want to do that. And so in that scripture, it also says something around, I'll put you before the right
Yep.
people, and I will give you the words to speak. And so it just kind of answered all of my doubts and fears and animosity about answering and fulfilling my call, was all kind of present in that scripture.
Wow.
And so my intention really was to go back to school and get a doctorate in computer science and ultimately teach.
Sure.
If I wasn't working in the industry.
Sure.
Because if I couldn't make it in the industry, then those who can't do, then teach. Right? Anyways, and so I was looking at programs to kind of go back to school to do IT stuff, and kind of in that moment there was a shift toward, well, Lord, if you really want me to be a pastor, then I know I have to go get educated. I know that I have to make moves toward
Yeah.
that field.
Yep.
And look, I put all this work into doing the IT field, and now you want me to be a pastor. So what does that look like?
Y'all, this is so good. I know y'all gonna be able to watch this, but like, this is because you hit on some things that I don't think a lot of people really know, and especially for pastors. Because as I'm hearing you talk, like I'm actually seeing myself in a lot of those called answers being called, called
Yeah.
being answered, confirmation. I'm sending you directly this scripture. And it's funny how the Lord will still drop these things right into your lap. The very things, okay, Lord, you want me to do this, but like, bruh,
Right. Yeah.
you got to give me something. Like, show me the way. And so to hear, like, and I could feel what it was like to read Matthew 10 and be like, oh,
Yeah. It came to tears, man.
you're talking to me.
I was like, wow, this is crazy.
This is crazy.
Yeah. These types of things don't happen, right? Like,
No.
not in real life.
This is movies. This
It
is only the movies.
It's a movie. Yeah.
So we tell the Lord, because I believe sometimes you do have to. I don't know how you all talk to the Lord, but
Right.
me and the Lord talk. Like, we have a real good relationship, and so I kind of talk maybe a little more crazy than people would like, but that's just our relationship. And so you have to get your own relationship too. But because it was a lot for me. Lord, what you talking about, bro? Like, because that don't even make no sense. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna do this. So now I need school.
Yeah.
Where does that come into play? Because I know, as I looked for seminaries, Emory was top of my list. It was top of my list.
Yeah.
At that time, they didn't have online classes.
Right.
And so I didn't want to move to Atlanta. But yet, here you are saying, Lord, I'm gonna say yes, but
Right.
I need this education. Like, I need this school.
Yep.
How does Emory come about?
Yeah. So that was another pushback.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Again, I'm fighting,
got you.
being submitting while at the same time pushing back and fighting, if you will,
Yeah.
in a way. And so my pushback then was, well, Emory is close. It's in Georgia. We were living in Georgia. At the time, we were living in Stone Mountain or Loganville area, which is just about an hour drive down Highway 78 and pretty much straight shot. You end up at Emory's campus.
Okay.
And I call it now the Trail of Tears. But my pushback was, I will apply to seminary, and if I get in, then this is real,
Sure.
right? There's a saying in ministry: you're either called or crazy.
That's it.
Right? And at the point, I was thinking, I'm crazy.
Yeah.
These things are happening. Yes, the signs are showing, but this is still very unreal.
Right.
And so I applied to Emory. I applied late. Really didn't have any really expectation of getting in. I had some friends from undergrad, professors from undergrad that were connected to Emory, that I even asked them late for recommendations.
Okay.
And yeah, and I'm still working for the IT firm. I'm trying to figure out, if I apply to this school, how can I work in IT as
Sure.
well as go to seminary, because of course we don't want to lose
Right.
salary.
Still gotta make a living.
Got to make a living,
Right.
and everything still needs to happen and function. I don't want to jump off the cliff, so to speak. I don't want to
Yes.
take that leap of faith.
Yes.
And like I said, my application was late, and then literally within a week I got a response. You're in. Welcome to Emory. You start on such and such date. You need to start thinking about what your schedule is going to look like.
Wow.
And so, having done that, and with the IT firm that I was working with, I had gone to school with them.
Sure.
I was working
Sure.
when I had finished my first undergrad, and then I did a second undergrad while I was working at that firm. I did a master's degree in network security while I was working with that firm. So they were used to me going to
Sure,
school.
sure.
Nothing new there. But here it is. I get accepted to Emory, Candler School of Theology, and I told them that I was going back to school. They knew what it was for, and for all intents and purposes, the people who were kind of my CEO and CIO and all those things, were people of faith. At least I thought. And as I got accepted, they gave me an ultimatum.
Wow.
Yeah, either you kind of reduce your class load, or give us your resignation. And at this point, I was kind of middle management, if you will,
Sure.
in that firm. And so I had a decision to make.
Oh,
And that was do I jump off this cliff
sure.
fully, right, and go full board into ministry, or do I say, Lord, you must be clowning around? Like,
You
this
have to
isn't
be.
real, right?
Right.
And, with all of those things that had been stacking up, all of those signs, and again, my pushback of only applying to one school, I never applied to another seminary.
Wow.
How could I say that it wasn't real? And so I really then had to evaluate my faith, my commitment to my faith. It was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Overwhelming. And then to really try to explain that to my family as well, because now everything is going to change.
Right. Right. Wow. We're in seminary. You have to make this decision. You finished, so I'm assuming you definitely made the decision to go to school. Definitely not I'm sure, an easy decision. You got to go home to wife and family. Hey, this is what's happening. Hey, the Lord is. You want to be mad at somebody? Be mad at the Lord. But we gonna be okay, right? I feel like that is definitely was the but we gonna be okay.
My catchphrase for that period of time was just have faith.
Just have faith. Wow.
It was hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think people really understand living out faith or walking that thing out, truly stepping on that bridge that you truly cannot see. And so, okay, we gonna walk this thing out. So we're at Candler. How does Candler? Because I'm currently in seminary, so I kind of know deconstruction and reconstruction, and how does going in with what you know, experience, life, where we are at that moment, how does Candler reshape you? How does stepping into these seminary classrooms with these other individuals, I'm sure, who all don't think like you, who all, I'm sure, don't look like you, who all don't come from the same background, what does Candler do? How does it form you? How does it break you down? How does it lift you up? Like, what do you come out? Because you come out different. And I just want people to understand that, who are listening, when you come out of seminary, it is different. And I tell people, I understand how people come out of seminary atheist. I get it.
Yeah.
100%. So what is that experience? What is that experience like?
Yeah, so back at Candler, we have a saying that that seminary steals your Jesus.
I believe it.
It steals your Jesus, right?
I believe it.
And I think what we mean by that is that if you go into seminary with expectations of who God is and who you are in relation to God, and you try to hold on to that understanding, then you are going to be very disappointed when you begin the journey of seminary education.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that many people go to seminary with the idea of, I'm just going to get this accreditation, I'm just going to get this piece of paper that officially says that I know what I'm doing as a pastor, or that I know the scriptures, or that for whatever many reasons, right? By the time that I entered seminary, my spirit was such that I just said, I will go there with no expectation. I will go there because now I understand that God has really, I'm thinking or feeling that God has really called me into this, and I'm not going to go with an expectation of, this is my God that I know. And having done all of that research, if you will, and exploration with all these other faith traditions, was really, this was an expansion of that. Right? I was just like, hey, whatever I can learn here, however, Lord, you shape me and form me in this experience, I literally took the stance, I will just keep going.
Wow.
I went one day at a time,
Yeah.
literally one day at a time.
Yeah.
Lost my IT job, I'm just going to keep going to school. Was broken down because my former educational experiences were great. It was material that I learned very easily, connected to very easily, very, what is it, right brain.
Yep.
1 + 1 = 2.
Right.
There's
Right.
no, in IT, the switch is on or off, right? And then I get into seminary and, I'm reading all of these different authors and theologians and history. And I remember the first, I think it was Christian, history of a Christian. And I got a straight up F. I had not seen F in education since since elementary school, right?
Wow.
And in elementary school, I had problems reading.
Sure.
Come to find out, I'm dyslexic. But
Okay.
but nonetheless, here it is. I'm sitting in my seminary class, get an F on the paper, and we're in this big old hall with all these students, and I'm like, why did I come here? Like, what am I doing? Lord, what are you doing?
Sure.
This is the very first time that I understood Lamentations.
That's
I didn't
good.
know what it meant
That's
to
good.
lament
To lament.
until then,
Okay.
right? Like, I
Okay.
had read the Lamentations,
Of
and
course.
and of course it's like, oh, raise your hand to God,
Right.
blah blah blah. I'm like, why would these people do this, right? They saw what God was doing.
Yeah.
But then I really did understand what it meant to lament, and so, and it wasn't because of the grade; it was because this thing was happening.
Sure.
I'm like trying to learn. It's material that's really challenging for me, and I'm being asked, rather than being, objective, not to be subjective,
Yes.
right? Like, I wrote, the reason I got the F was because I repeated everything that I had
Of course.
read.
Of
right?
course.
Oh,
Of course.
Karl Barth says
Right.
this, and
Right.
Soren Kierkegaard says this,
Right.
and so and so and so and so says this, and they were like, "Yeah, but what do you think?"
What do you think?
And I was like, "Wait, what? Like, you don't? No, God doesn't use me like that."
Right.
I read the papers.
Right.
I read the history, right? And I'm putting it into, I'm regurgitating.
Yeah.
Right? And that wasn't what Candler wanted. Candler wanted us to read these theologians, read the history, and begin to formulate our own opinions and our own, bring into it our own understandings, and then really kind of marinate that all of those things into what is God really saying through you.
Right.
And that was really difficult. It was a very challenging thing for me. But my resolve, if you will, in that period of time was just keep going. Just Trail of Tears was me getting in my car
That's right.
and crying all the way to school and saying, Lord, lamenting, what are you doing? Why would you do this? You've changed my life. I've lost everything that was important, I thought, other than my family.
Sure.
But I will keep going.
I've lost it all.
Yeah.
But the very things that are very important, I've lost it all. So that's interesting. Wow. Let me tell y'all, seminary is hard.
It's hard. It's not
Okay,
it's not an
like,
easy world.
Seminary is hard. And I've heard a person say one time, she equated seminary to law school. And she said it is as equally grueling
I would agree
as
with that.
as a law degree.
I would agree with that. And I think what's equally grueling, and the reason that I would always advocate for people to go in person, I know that many schools
Sure.
are doing online, and I appreciate that, right? I think it's good because of the modern world. Having the ability to kind of be on campus is a really tough thing. But what I found in being in person was, first of all, community. And secondly, like law, in theology, you're learning to speak a new language.
Yes.
You're it's you're learning to understand theological concepts, and you have to put those theological concepts in conversation
Yes.
with your ideas, with other ideas, and other people.
Right.
Because just like doctors, medical doctors have to learn how to speak the medical language,
Yeah.
and lawyers need to learn to speak
That's right.
legalese.
That's right.
We, as those who serve in that capacity in the church, really need to understand theology in that way.
That's
and
good.
and so we need to learn how to speak the language of theology in a way that when we are approached by our parishioners, our laypersons, and even other clergy, that we are constantly learning, growing,
Yes.
and we have the language to speak about it so that we can articulate to our communities of faith what these things mean,
Yeah.
right? Because on the surface, if you put Karl Barth next to Soren Kierkegaard, to use those two as an example again, you could read them and they sound pretty much the same.
Right.
But when you begin to delve into the intricacies of their theological premises, then you'll see the differences. And
yeah.
you can't do that unless you actually do that in conversation.
That's so good. I say that often. So I attend ILIF, School of Theology, in Denver. We are on my last year. Sweet baby
Yay!
Jesus.
All
Sweet baby Jesus.
right, that's what's up.
But I talk about that often because I go from afar. And so I do a hybrid program where we truly only go once a quarter to be on campus. And I say seminary has been great, but I miss the aspect of being in class and being with my peers and having those conversations to where we can wrestle with the text and truly live out or be able to have this conversation through the language of what it means to do things theologically and how to read and process theologically. I am very critical. I think seminary has also made me very critical of the Bible and other readings because now my brain is so programmed to deconstruct the text and really get to the bottom of what this really means. That's cool. So you go through Candler.
Yeah.
We get all the way to the end, and you say, I want a doctorate.
No, that's not really how.
Okay, because I always wonder, like, what leads people to go from Masters of Divinity to doctorate in ministry?
Yeah. Personal goal setting was part of that. I feel like as a black man in America, that one of my early goals and having come from challenges in education, growing up, and reading difficulties and that kind of thing, one of my personal goals was always to obtain a doctorate, right? So that was more a personal thing.
Okay.
But also, for ministry, for me, why it was a doctor in ministry and not a PhD
Sure.
was because I liked the practical aspect of the doctorate in ministry. Really taking the context of what I am doing and how I am serving and how I apply the theological concepts. And as I think that as Wesleyan Christians,
Sure.
We really have a bent toward practical theology. We're practical theologians,
Yes,
right?
we are.
And so for me, practical theology means that not only do I read it in a book, but how do I apply it?
Yep.
And how do I go about the work of social justice? How do I serve the community? How do I take what I've learned and put it into action? And so that was the allure for me to do a work in doing a DMin.
Gotcha.
And so my doctoral studies were centered around community building, around food insecurity, and the work or collaboration of community partners to serve the needs of a community.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah.
That's dope. So when do we move into, got your doctorate? So school essentially is done. How do we move into first appointment?
Oh yeah.
So how do we get hooked up with the North Georgia
Yeah, so
United Methodist Church Conference?
So I was in North Georgia when I had decided to answer my call. I was working with Phil Schrader, who's that pastor that I had talked
Okay.
about earlier, and he was the my pastor who ended up baptizing our children. We became very close in that in that in that ministry there in Grayson, Georgia, and. So when I decided to answer my call and started seminary and then lost the job in IT, I was about halfway through seminary when I am working through the starting that ordination process in United Methodist Church.
Yep.
So I'm sitting with another advisor, and as I'm sitting in the office with that advisor, we receive a phone call from the district superintendent saying, hey, stop talking to him about going to school and learning to be a pastor and tell him that we have an appointment for him in a small black church
Okay.
in kind of rural Georgia.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you in there.
Yeah. With like the part-time local pastor
Sure.
salary.
Yes.
Having gone from IT salary to
Right.
part-time local pastor salary, which for those who don't understand the Methodist system, that is like
No money.
nothing, right? And then, and into a church which, for all intents and purposes, was dead.
Okay.
Like there are a few people there. I always make the reference or kind of joke that, it had a cemetery in the backyard. There were more people in the back than there were inside the church. And I don't know that they specifically sent me there to close the church, but I did not want to be a church closer
Sure.
when I started my ministry.
Okay.
And so I was looking for ways to revitalize that church, to grow the community, to do outreach, and
Yeah. What did you learn? Biggest takeaway from that experience?
My biggest takeaway from that first church was learn all that you can. And the words of my advisor before he sent me there was just love the people. And I really kind of take that everywhere that I go. Any ministry setting that I work in now is, am I starting with love? Am I starting with the love of God's people?
Yeah.
Regardless of whatever decisions are made, regardless of how I go about, connecting with the community, am I doing the work of God's love and perpetuating that love into the community? And so the biggest takeaway was just love God's people. And I went there, and like I said, there was probably maybe 10, maybe 20 people really left in that church. And it was a ministry of love. We didn't have a musician. We didn't have all of the things that that church,
You would need
larger
to see
churches
today.
come
Yeah.
with. Yeah, and we needed to revision how are we going about ministry here.
Yeah.
In the first 3 months of me being at that church, I think I did 5 or 6 funerals. Wow. And that was older people, and we had a younger person that was killed, unfortunately. So there was a lot of learning to be a pastor, and really those people taught me
Gotcha.
how to be that.
That's awesome. Awesome. Where do we go from there? What's next, church? What's
So
next appointment?
The next appointment was that we, again, I did not want to be a church killer.
Yeah.
I didn't want to start my career as being a church killer. So there was again, this was a small black church in Tequila, Georgia. Right down the street, less than a mile away, was First Church.
Okay.
And if you don't know, in the South, the connotation of a First Church is big white church.
That's right.
And the ethnic churches have names, right?
Yeah.
So the church that I was serving was Mount Zion, and the one down the street the white church was First Church.
First, yeah.
Even though they came after the Mount Zion.
Gotcha.
But they were still First Church. And so I began to think about how can we partner in ministry with First Church. Began to work with the pastor down the street. When we started doing joint services like Christmas and Easter and Sunrise and those types of things. And we would bounce back and forth between the two campuses. And as that discussion continued, we thought about how do we really partner in ministry and merge these two churches. So here it is. We are in Georgia, kind of the hotbed of the South.
Right.
Obviously, racism is still very prevalent.
Yeah.
And we said, let's merge this black church and white church and make really a community of faith for the whole community, and think about that. And so we worked through the process of merging those two churches.
Wow.
My smaller campus became a youth campus. It was directly across the street from the high school. So we started a pancake breakfast for their Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and that ended up the church was serving breakfast to 200 students on a Friday morning. And, Friday Night Lights is, football games.
Yeah.
We did prep rallies and car washes and all different types of things in this newly merged church.
That's awesome.
And then I served as the associate pastor at the newly merged church for, I think, 2 years before being moved to the next church.
Wow.
Yeah.
Come on, itinerant system. But that's dope. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge undertaking, and especially when you think about, again, we're in the South.
Yeah.
We're still dealing with racism. It is still very much alive, and especially in those places. And yet I'm bringing these two congregations together, and we're becoming one, and we're still doing amazing ministry in this place. Yeah, that's super dope. That's super dope. So you developed these churches. How long were you at this church, at First Church?
Which one? There?
Yeah.
The merged church?
Yeah.
I think it was 2 years after the churches merged.
Okay.
And then from that point, then again, I'm kind of going through the ordination process in North Georgia, meeting with the district committee on ordained ministry, preparing my paperwork for the Board of Ordained Ministry.
Okay.
And then they moved me to Clarkston, Georgia. And at the time, Clarkston, Georgia was the most racially diverse city in the United States.
Wow. Okay.
Because it was a refugee resettlement area.
Okay. Okay.
And the church there had gone through what we refer to as white flight, because the demographic in that city had changed so dramatically.
Yep.
And so it was a kind of a big steeple church that had a big reduction in membership, and they were trying really to kind of revitalize that church.
Okay.
And so again, part-time local pastor,
Wow.
still not making or earning that salary,
Sure.
but then being sent to a church that really did need that type of reconnection to the community.
Awesome. Revitalizing pastor. Interesting. It's an interesting title right there. I think the Lord was up to something.
The Lord was definitely doing something.
Was definitely up to something. So we go through those experiences.
Yeah.
You're part-time local pastor. Again, where you are today. So I know you went through the process. You become an elder.
Nope.
No.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So moved to Clarkston. Was kind of promised 4 years there as I worked through the process of ordination. But
and mind you all, the process is long.
It's long, yeah.
Okay, it is long.
And in North Georgia, I hit some roadblocks.
Okay. Okay.
I refer to it as systemic racism. Others might have a different view.
Sure.
But for me, so in the North Georgia Conference, you got to write your paperwork. You go through these multiple boards. They interview you based on your many different criteria. Your word, your service, your health,
All of it.
all things.
Yeah.
And at that point in North Georgia, they also had a required credit score. So I go before the Board of Ordained Ministry.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, I know.
Wait.
I know. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. So I go before the Board of Ordained Ministry, write all my paperwork. They review the paperwork. I go through the interviews. All things are well. And at the end of this process, you meet before
Sure.
everybody, all of
Yeah.
the different boards then come together, and you kind of before the larger body of the Board of Ordained Ministry. They said, your interviews were great. Your paperwork was great. We really appreciate all the things that you've been doing in ministry. We saw the merger in the church. We see the work that you did at Tequila. We see the work that you're doing at Clarkston. But at this time, we require a 650 credit score. And I guess this is supposed to be a measure of financial stewardship.
Right.
And at the time, I had a 647. Again, second career person.
Right.
At that point, it was my fourth degree. I hadn't done my doctorate yet, but it was my fourth degree. A family, children, headed off to college, all things, and a 647. And this was just before I had actually graduated seminary. So,
Okay.
So even the seminary student loans hadn't really even hit my credit yet. So so I was like, ooh, that's going to be tough.
Yeah.
So then they put me out and said, hey, listen, work with a credit counselor for the next however many years, and then come back to us when your credit score goes higher. So in the meantime, this is when I was doing the work at merging the churches, working at Tequila, then from Tequila being sent to Clarkston. And then when my time came around again to meet with the district board before they send me on to the Board of Ordained Ministry, they said, well, your credit score still hasn't gotten high enough for us to send you to the Board of Ordained Ministry, so we're not even going to send you to the Board of Ordained Ministry. In fact, we don't think that your credit score will ever get high enough for you to go before the Board of Ordained Ministry. So you need to really kind of make some decisions around whether or not you want to, you are called or need to be in ministry. And if I'm not getting ordained, then that means I'm never getting a full-time salary. That means that, in fact, when I had gone before that district board and left, again, part-time local pastor, I got a call to come back to the DCOM. I go back to the DCOM, and the person tells me, well, we still require, we figured out that we also require for our full-time local pastors to have the same credit score, so you can't even be made a full-time.
Oh, my goodness.
You can't even be made a full-time local pastor. So I had to go home and make some decisions.
Oh, my gosh.
I get a call from my district superintendent. He says, we give you the freedom, if you will, to go and apply with other annual conferences, because not every annual conference has this requirement.
Wow.
So this is how I then ultimately make the connection between North Georgia and the Desert Southwest, where I ultimately came to be ordained. Yeah. It's been a journey in this church. It's been a journey in my call, and
Boy.
and yeah, and so it's yeah.
Wow.
I should probably write a book.
I mean, come on. Why not?
Right?
Why not?
Yeah.
Because you're gonna help somebody. Because I'm actually kind of speechless a little bit, just because you're asking me to. Yes, you're asking me to have this credit score, but then you come back and then you insult me, because then you say, "Oh, we don't think you will ever get to where we want you to be."
And here's the kicker. So I had worked for 2 years at Clarkston,
Right.
the church that had white flight, and I had gotten that church to a point where now they could hire a full-time elder
Wow.
because of the revitalization
Sure.
that was happening. And they said, we're not going to ordain you here, but we would like to move you to another broken church. And we would like for you to revitalize
Because you're the fixer.
another church. And since you've raised this one to a full-time elder position, now we need to,
We need you
that's
to
an
do that
open
again.
spot. Now we need to appoint somebody there that's a full-time elder.
So do all the work and get none of the reward. But your reward is you're going to go and do this again. Because now we've identified.
With no promises that
with
you'll ever be ordained here.
none of it. But we've identified that you are a revitalizer. And so we need you in these spaces.
Right.
And we thank God for those pastors who are revitalizers.
Absolutely.
Thank you for what you do.
And church starters. Too.
And church starters. Being
yeah.
a church planter, I get it. But wow.
Yeah. Like I said, it's been a bit a crazy journey for me in this thing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, if you can imagine, just from a psychological standpoint, again, being a black man in America,
Sure.
always hearing the messaging, receiving the messaging, you're not enough, right?
Always.
That creates this kind of inferiority complex.
Yes.
That, I'm trying to do more. I'm trying to be more. I'm trying to add value to everything that I'm doing in ministry, but yet and still,
It's not good enough.
it's not good enough.
So we come to the desert. You find life in the desert.
Yeah, which is crazy. I've got a couple of stones, if you will,
Yeah.
with writing on them from verses of finding life in the desert.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what that's like, to come to the desert and find life. Because when you think about desert, you only think about hot, dry,
Right.
sand,
Sure.
rattlesnakes, scorpions. And yet, being here, especially being here for a year now, I get to see the beauty that comes from the desert. And you have to reframe your way of thinking and looking at things to see the beauty in the desert. So you come to the desert, you go through the process.
Start the process.
We start
at
the
least.
process, yeah. We make it through the process, and I'm sure that's another whole
I
journey
can tell
within
you a whole lot
itself,
more
right?
about that there.
Another whole journey,
Yeah.
And then we get to Vegas.
Yeah, so my entry into the Desert Southwest was through Vegas.
Okay.
So basically, when I interviewed with the Desert Southwest Conference, the first church that I served was in Vegas, Trinity,
Okay.
in Vegas.
How was Vegas? I've loved Vegas to go and have a good time. Again, living this far west is for the first time ever. So,
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about, I want to live in Las Vegas. Well, what would it be like to live in Las Vegas? But, how was it for you and your family to move from Georgia, come to Vegas? It's hot, it's different. It's a new environment. It's just new. It's just new. It's nothing
Yeah.
I'm sure you've ever witnessed or been at. Hey, I go to Vegas to party, right? But it's different.
Never had done that.
Never had
either.
done that, right? So now, first time in Vegas,
Yeah.
and now we're living here.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. Big culture shift, obviously. Big move for my older children stayed back east,
Okay.
but we moved with our daughter Zoe, and at the time she was in middle school, so this was a very traumatic jump for her.
Yeah.
Coming out of the home that she grew up in, she had never been in any other environment really. Had grown up in the house that we lived in.
Okay.
And so for her to move away from all of her friends, her family,
Yeah.
Everything, traumatic, very traumatic. And for me, I never thought that I would ever, first of all, live out west.
Sure.
Secondly, Vegas, of all places. And the interesting part about it was that I didn't think I would like it.
Okay.
I didn't know anything about Vegas other than what I had heard on TV.
Sure.
Right. Very similar to people don't understand or know anything about the Bronx as
Right.
opposed to what they
see on TV.
On
Yeah.
TV. And so we moved there, kind of just knowing that, right?
Yep.
Oh, it's a, casinos, Sin City, so all of the things that we are taught or learn. And what we found, maybe after a year of being in Vegas, was this awesome community. Like, Vegas is a small town.
Yeah.
Everybody knows each other. It's geographically fairly large, but at the same time, everybody knows each other. I became very connected very quickly
Okay.
into local politics, into community, social groups, into social justice ministries, and really and truly the community of Vegas, not the people who kind of tour and
Come in and
the
out.
tourists.
Yeah.
The community of Vegas is really just one big family. I mean, like, they really know each other, and like I said, they're willing to help and engage in all types of things. You probably have the most churches per capita
Okay.
in Vegas, which
Wow.
no one really understood or knew
had no
or
idea.
knows. There's a number of help organizations that are there, which if you plug into, they're always willing to collaborate and to work in ministry together. So it was really kind of a great experience
Wow.
to land in Vegas and then
Yeah.
get connected that way and to learn about the Vegas community. I feel honored to call myself, a part of that community, even still.
That's awesome.
And as the Vegas community has grown, I feel like I'm still really kind of a part of it.
That's
So
awesome. How long were you at Trinity?
I served in Vegas for 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. 5 years in Trinity. And as we know, we're itinerant.
Yep.
And so we get the call.
Yep.
You get the call and they say, First Mesa.
Yep.
What do you say? What do you think? What are you processing?
Yeah, really tough.
Yeah.
To be fair, I got the call to move to Mesa in year 4
Okay.
when I was at Trinity. And I pled with the bishop, asked for a reprieve, knowing how tough the move had been for our family and for my daughter, and said, listen, she's now, I think she was a junior at that point. She was a sophomore in high school. She had really made some inroads into connecting with some friends and becoming, connected to the community. And I didn't want to pull her out of high school and now midway, like I did when she was in middle school, and really kind of disrupt her life again. And so I began to think about, like, how can I go and serve in Phoenix while she
Sure.
finishes,
Sure.
or in Mesa while she finishes high school. But I pled, and I said, Bishop, can you possibly give us a reprieve for at least a year and see where we're at? And the bishop was gracious, and said yes. So we didn't move that year. And so when I get the call, actually I'm walking out of my church office, and headed home kind of fairly late one evening, and I get a phone call, and I'm looking at my cell phone, and it says Bishop Hoshibata. And my wife was walking out the office. She goes, "Oh no!" She says, "Oh no," because it was around that time.
Right.
That time of year, which was interesting because you usually get a call from not the bishop. You get
Right.
a call from your district superintendent.
Right.
But I had got a call from the bishop, and the bishop said, basically, "Hey, I know we talked about this last year." And I gave you that reprieve last year, but we had an interim at the church where we want to send you, and I'm going to need you to go this year.
Okay.
And so I had a conversation with the family, and of course,
Sure.
as the kind of joke goes, you get one no in your lifetime in
That's
the
it.
United Methodist Church. I
That's it.
used my trump card there.
Right.
And so I agreed to the move, and by that time, honestly, my daughter was ready, our
Okay.
family was ready. It was still not the greatest of circumstances that she would be moving in her junior year.
Right.
But what did we know? This was late 2019. We didn't know COVID was on the horizon.
Right.
And so we moved in June of or July of 2019, and of course COVID hit in 2020.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
COVID is here.
Right.
2020.
Yep.
We moved to Mesa.
Yep.
We done uprooted. We get to Mesa. How long were we at Mesa?
4 years in Mesa.
4 years in Mesa. How was Mesa first?
Mesa first.
Mesa first.
Yep.
All right. Experience. Takeaway from Trinity. What would be a takeaway from Trinity?
The takeaway from Trinity was now understanding maybe the culture of the West. Having lived in Vegas for 5 years, on getting acclimated to the heat,
Yep.
to the environment,
Yep.
and really a better sense of, again, connectedness to community, right?
Yeah.
Like that church is really, and the takeaway that my first advisor
Sure.
had given me, just love the people, right?
Yeah.
As long as I continue to work in that modality, I think that the doors are open and God's Spirit moves in that way.
Yep.
And so so the takeaway from Trinity is continue to love the people,
Yeah.
right? And the work of ministry is connecting to community and being a part of a system, if you will, that ultimately can grow. And it's not just about numbers and seats for worship, but it's also, I think, effectiveness in how we reach those who are least, lost, forgotten.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Love that. We get to Mesa. Now being senior pastors under your belt a little bit, 5 years. We come into this new space.
Yep.
What is that like coming into this new space? Again, experiences, knowing what you know, feeling, I'm sure, a lot more confident. I know what I'm getting,
Yeah.
not necessarily getting into, but I know my role.
Right.
I know what I'm going in to do. What is that like coming into First Mesa with that experience now? Because we have a little bit under our belt.
Yeah. Exciting.
Okay.
And at the same time, a little nerve-wracking, right?
Yeah.
Like, what am I going into? I think anytime that we move as pastors, that's the question,
Yep.
right? What am I facing as I step into this new environment? I think about things in family system
Sure.
theory,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
so in thinking about how do I fit into this new system,
Yeah.
right? Because although the pastor may be the quote unquote explicit leader of the church, the pastor is never that, especially walking in the door.
Sure.
There are always going to be those leaders, those agents behind the scenes, people that people default to, and there's different characteristics or
Yep.
different personalities within the church. So just going to Mesa was an experience in learning who are they, how can I contribute to the ministries here, how can I help be a part of, come alongside and walk with the folks at First Mesa,
Yeah.
and but also at the same time try to help them expand those ministries or grow in those ministries or become what they're called to be.
Gotcha. Love it. So now that we're at Mesa, we've had some experiences. How long were you at Mesa?
4 years.
4 years. 4 years at
Yep.
Mesa first. Was there because now we are director of connectional ministries, right, for the conference. We've now gone from the local sense of the church, and we've now moved into what we consider the cabinet or the, as I like to say, the behind the scenes of the church, the
Right.
conference level,
Yeah.
if you will. How do we get to director of connectional ministry?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
No, I mean,
yeah.
I think I have always had aspirations, kind of as noted earlier in
Yeah.
the IT field of like moving up the quote unquote chain. I never really thought about the church in that way.
Sure.
And so for me, it was never really about climbing the ladder, but always about kind of doing the best work that I can.
Yeah.
The position of director of connectional ministries had been vacant for 3 years, and there was some expectation that it would become available. And so in our annual conference, we also started a process of open or what we call clear openings for appointments. And I thought, maybe I could do that job. Maybe I can do that.
Sure.
And so when the clear opening came, I kind of put my name out there. Not really with, well, maybe an expectation. Obviously,
Sure.
if you apply for something, there's an expectation. But to think about the type of person that I am, and the ways that I feel that I do ministry have been about connection, about community, about knowing a resource here and connecting it to the need here. And so my thought process was, man, that would be a really great job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not because it's not because it's a high and lofty,
Sure.
authoritarian type position, but because I think that the work of that would be fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like to
Yeah.
make those connections and to understand how resources get to churches and really to collaborate with many of the different pastors, the laity, the conference committees, all of those types of things. And so I had a conversation with the bishop. And initially, I wanted to jump right into it.
Sure.
And he's
Yep.
like, hey, I think I might want to bring you on. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah. He's
Yeah.
like, nope, take your time.
Right.
He's like, think about it
Right.
and get back to me. And I was like, okay. And so I had a conversation with my family, prayed about it, and accepted the appointment. And so, yeah, and so that's really kind of how it came about.
Gotcha. If you had to describe it to a stranger on the street, how would you describe your role in 5 words or less?
One word,
Sure.
connection.
Love it.
That's it.
Love it.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
I make connections.
Yeah.
Or I help I walk alongside and promote connections with our conference committees, with our churches, with the denomination. I'm looking at the man in the middle.
Right. Right. And even with that connection, so as many people know, and some may not know, the Methodist Church has gone through, has been in the media, especially United Methodist Church, for some years now, with disaffiliation and all of those churches leaving the denomination over homosexuality and the expressions that those within, as I call the rainbow community, express themselves as they feel God has created them to be from the womb until now. How has, in your opinion, yes, the church has changed a lot, but how have you seen the UMC moving forward in today's world? Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of going back all
Okay.
the way to the Bronx.
Sure.
Right. And the work that my stepfather was doing in the community and learning about ministry in a context of framed in social justice. I always felt that the United Methodist Church had the greatest connection or understanding of, again, practical theology,
Yeah.
connection to community, and doing the work of loving God's people, whether that's through social justice ministries or walking alongside and with people and using the example of Jesus Christ in that model.
Yes.
And so for me, seeing the struggles of the United Methodist Church over the years, I was raised in it even before my stepmother and dad were married. I was baptized in a United Methodist Church. For me, we are now just catching up to our values. That our stated values are that we are a church that cares about people, that are
Yeah.
fully inclusive, that is, you know, charged by God's love and move toward God's justice for God's people.
Right.
And I feel like our book of discipline, our rules are just now catching up to our stated values.
Right.
And so I'm very hopeful for where the church is now. I pray that regardless of our theological perspectives, that we still continue to live into the beloved God's, the fullness of God's community.
Yeah.
And now that we don't have the kind of restrictions that we did in our books, I pray
Yeah.
that we can live into it more fully, not thinking about, oh, if as pastors, if I do this, or this, then I, could be charged or excommunicated or defrocked or however you want to say those things. And we value each individual the way that God values each individual.
That's good. That's good. Come on, we moving forward. We moving forward. As somebody would say, we're not going back.
Not going back.
Cool. Hey man, thank you. Thank you for this time.
Yeah, thank
This has
you. I'm
been
sorry it's such a long interview.
no. This has been really dope. It's been good. I don't really care about time, as long as it's rich.
Right.
And I feel
Yeah.
like this has definitely been rich. For all of our listeners, those listening, those becoming, what advice would you give that person that wants somebody who is on their journey of becoming who God has called them to be as they walk into their purpose?
You know, I think the most important part of answering or fulfilling a call, and I've had this question asked of me. There are many, actually, I've had a lot of people who I've helped fulfill their call or answer their call or been a part of their process. In fact, there's a couple who are actually in seminary right now. And my advice for them has been, because, again, the question is raised, am I called or am I crazy? Right?
Yeah.
Is God really calling me, even though I have this doubt, even though I have this fear, even though I think God is pushing me in this direction, but that doesn't make any sense, right? And that's the hard part, because it didn't make any sense for me to lose my IT job. It didn't make
Right.
any sense for me to have a loss of salary.
Right.
It didn't make any sense for me to move to Vegas. It
Sure.
didn't, like, all of the things along the way, I can say that did not make very much sense. But I think the most important part is to, as Jesus says to the disciples about ministry, love God. And then love neighbor
Yeah.
as yourself,
Yeah.
which implies that you also love self, right? So the love of how you continue to listen to God is an act of love. How you continue to walk that journey of faith is an act of love. How you respond to God's call is an act of love, and it's not going to make sense, because sometimes love just doesn't make sense.
Yep.
But if I'm the disciple who is sitting there with Jesus and he says to me, how are you going to tell people how to answer their call? I'll just say love. That's it. That's it. Just let it be an act of love.
Yeah.
Love for God, love for neighbor. Those are the two most important commandments, and everything else will fall into place.
Wow.
That's kind of what Jesus says.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend Dr. Khalif Smith, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
the
listening.
invitation.
It has been great. And yeah, we will definitely see you on the other side. And remember, God loves you and so do I. So have a good day.
You know the funny thing? My
yeah.
grandfather used to say, Jesus loves you and so do I. And so that's my moniker as well,
Hey, I
which
love
is
it.
crazy.
I love
I heard you say it and I was like completely cracked up. But my grandfather used to answer the phone with bill collectors like that. He would say, Jesus loves you and so do I.
I love it. I love it.
Right.
Hey, thank y'all. Thank y'all for joining us for the Becoming Project. We'll see you soon. Peace.
Peace.